This is my small locomotive called Ken, and it's sat on the workbench for the boiler hydraulic test. It normally lives in a shed outside in the garden. I built this engine in 1996, and I used to run it round my garden very frequently, but as the years have gone by, I seem to be more busy making videos and repairing steam engines than actually running them. Here are a few shots of it on the bench. It's ready for a bit of a clean up, but it's really okay. It's never ever let me down and runs very well. This is a shot of the boiler backhead with all the controls, and for any viewers who don't know anything about steam locomotives, I'm going to label the parts that you need to operate to make it go. There's a pressure gauge to tell you what the steam pressure is. Then there's a regulator which regulates the amount of steam you let to the cylinders. This engine has a pair of water gauges to tell you what the level of water is in the boiler, and a pair of injector water valves to control how much water runs from the tender to the live steam injectors. One of the most important parts is the fire hole door, and that's where you shovel the coal into the firebox. Mounted on the floor of the cab are two levers. The first one is the cylinder drain cox operating lever, and the second one is the main reversing lever. Mounted on the turret from left to right, first of all there are a pair of injector steam valves, followed by the blower valve, the whistle valve, and a valve I fitted to operate a steam brake but never got round to making the steam brake. This is the tender or riding truck that's built very strongly to carry my weight, and this is towed behind the engine and contains a water tank and a box for the coal. Even though the engine itself has water tanks, the water in those tanks gets warm, and warm water is no good for injectors. For an injector to work well, it needs to have cold water to cool it quickly so that when you open the steam valve it picks up quickly. This tender has an internal brass water tank that are soldered together. And it also has motorcycle type footsteps, somewhere to put my feet when I'm riding around the track. This engine has a mechanical lubricator that has never ever given any trouble, and so it would hold plenty of steam oil and not run out. I made a second tank, and this tank is connected to the lubricator with a balancing pipe, so when I fill up the first tank it equalizes very quickly. The steam dome has a special feature. It's got a machined aluminium insert that is a piston fit on the part that it sits on, so it fits together really well, very smoothly. You can hear the pop as I remove it. So it's held in place by suction and doesn't vibrate. Because this small locomotive runs around my garden railway that's not the most even railway in the world, I made sure that the suspension was very flexible and very soft. And since 1996 it has never derailed around my garden railway, even going at speed. So the soft suspension is a good idea to keep it on the track. But the side effect of this soft suspension is when it's pulling very hard it bobs about. Time for a run on the bench on the rolling road. I have a good way of connecting compressed air to the boiler. I'm using a safety valve with the innards removed, and into that I push a piece of silicone rubber tubing followed by the airline fitting which expands the tubing, which is then held in place by the internal threads of the safety valve body. All I have to do now is squeeze the trigger to fill the boiler and it should go. My compressor is very quiet but only has a small capacity, so you'll hear it kicking in a moment. The other safety valve is almost trying to blow off. I put about £50 per square inch in the boiler, and when I open the regulator, when I built this engine, it was a bit of an experiment, so some of the parts are non-standard, and I used quite a few small ball racers which are 1/8 of an inch thick and 1/4 of an inch in diameter with a 1/8 hole through the centre. So most of the moving parts on the valve gear have a bearing in them, and to be fair, since 1996 the wear is negligible. And here's the wonderful lubricator that's worked all the time ever since I fitted it, and it ratchets over perfectly and provides plenty of oil for the cylinders. The only thing I did wrong when I made this, well, one of the things that I did wrong was to make the motion bracket from brass. which is a bit thin and bends slightly. It moves slightly when the locomotive's running, but this has never been a problem. When I made this engine, I did a really stupid thing. On the drawing, it only showed one pair of brake shoes on the rear wheel. But I wanted 2 brake shoes each side, one on each wheel. But really one's okay because the coupling rod prevents the other wheel from turning, of course, so I made a really complicated scissors mechanism underneath, and as I turn the brake handle in the cab, the shoes go onto the wheels and come off the wheels. Not strictly necessary, but aesthetically it looks good with 2 brake shoes at each side. Plus I enjoyed making the mechanism. Here's a close-up view of the suspension. I mean, this is a mechanical disaster really, because if you work it out with all these rigid rods, the engine should not be able to rock from side to side. It should be able to rock from front to rear like this, but not from side to side. But it's this side-to-side suspension that keeps it on the track. In the past I've seen some extraordinarily well-made engines, very well engineered indeed, but then they weren't too good on the track and kept falling off the track when they were going round corners. The tolerances on the coupling rods etc. of a steam locomotive need to allow for this sideways movement. I've used a lot of ball racers, one here and one here, one there, and then 2 at the front on the valve fork, and even 2 more in the drag links. And what I found over the years is, well, they haven't really worn, but I did allow a little bit of movement in the holes in the metal, just so I got this slackness to allow me to go around corners and over undulating track. When I built this engine, I also made a very large whistle for underneath the footplate for a much deeper note, but in the end I was quite happy with the high-pitched one that is fastened to the cab. I'll show you what I mean. It sounds okay, it's a bit high-pitched. A bit like Thomas the Tank Engine, I suppose. In this clip I'm opening the regulator. And this rocking about is not due to any problem, nothing's really worn, it's just because of the very soft suspension, but I do intend to leave it this way. Time to stop talking and let you hear the sound of the engine instead. This is the engine running very, very slowly with the regulator just cracked open. This is the tender filler cap that I made. You may recognise this design from one I used on model steamboats. I'm going to remove the top cover because I want to have a look inside. The plate is made from steel and over the years it's gone a bit rusty. The Allen bolts are also a bit rusty, so what I'm going to do is remove this mounting plate and repaint it, removing the rust before I do that. As I take the top off it, as you can see, there's a brass water tank inside. And I think while I'm at it, I'll repaint the seat as well. I may even ask my friend Andrew to cover it in leather. That would be quite nice. I thought it would be a good idea to show some random shots of the railway. Here it is in the orchard out the back of the house, which is very full of apples at the moment. Unfortunately, I don't really like the texture of apples unless they're in apple pie or apple crumble, but being diabetic, that's not the best thing to eat. This is my Hammond organ and musical instrument graveyard. Every garden should have one. Here's the flatbed type passenger truck. This was made in 1996 as well. And believe it or not, it's been outside on the railway all these years. I painted it once. And by some sort of a miracle, it still runs very well. I've pushed it up a very small incline, and now watch, it comes back to me. That is quite amazing. One problem I have with this truck though is the wheels are very rusty. So when I run it, the engine really struggles on the curves. I should really fit differential axles to it. This is a wooden top that I made for the passenger truck in 2015 when I ran it at a barbecue. That's about it for my small locomotive called Ken, and by the way, it was called Ken in memory of my father, Kenneth Appleton. A very good man who sadly died aged only 65. My father taught me a lot in life, not just about steam engines. He was a very wise man. And that's about it. I'm going to leave the engine running on the bench. And in case you wonder what the reflection is in the side, that's a logo on my t-shirt, and it's called The Spirit of Jazz, from a TV programme in England called The Mighty Boosh. That's it from me. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website. Click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you will find it very easy to find other videos that you may like to watch.